Hey everyone, this is my list of the top 5 classics of American film. These are the 5 most essential movies from the golden age of Hollywood. You may have seen some, if not all of these movies, but this list is especially for anyone who is curious about Hollywood classics and wondering like which are the most important movies, which are the ones that are where you should start to get your film education. And these are the 5 movies that I think most represent what classic Hollywood was all about, and really what Hollywood still is about today, because you can see um, the DNA of today's films in these very early classic films. So let's go ahead and get started. The first film on the list is Casablanca.
Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine. What's that you're playing?
Or just a little something of my own.
Oh, stop it. You know what I want to hear.
No, don't.
So let's go over the stats. Casablanca was from the year 1942. It was directed by Michael Curtiz. It was the winner of 3 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director, but none of the acting awards, which is a little surprising. It made $6.9 million at the box office, which translates to $330 million today. And it is number 3 on AFI's list of the top 100 movies. I mean, what can I say about Casablanca that you don't already know? Even if you haven't seen the movie, you have certainly heard some of those iconic lines. You almost certainly know the famous music. You have seen this movie parodied so many different times. And so even if you haven't seen it, you understand it. But what I think is most special about this movie is the star power. You have Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman. They are just the definition of movie stars. And if you are not familiar with classic cinema, and when you think of movie stars, maybe you think of George Clooney, Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, or going even a little further back, perhaps, Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone or Meg Ryan. Obviously, these are all great movie stars. But when you look back at early Hollywood and you see some of these films, the star power of Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman is as great as any of those people that I just mentioned. And if you just saw a picture or a few clips of Humphrey Bogart, you may be like, oh, he's not very attractive. He's just this grumpy old man. Once you have seen a Humphrey Bogart movie, especially one of his iconic roles, you will be like, oh, I get it. And the chemistry between these two is off the charts, and it's the whole movie hinges on their attraction to each other, which is why when you get to the end, spoiler alert, and they don't end up together, it is yeah, it really means something, because you see the chemistry between them and you want them to be together. That brings me to the other thing that you need to know about Casablanca, which is that ending is just the perfect Hollywood ending. And we think of Hollywood and we think of the happy ending. We think of, oh, no matter how improbable it is, the two leads end up together, or we end up with that happy. No, this is not a movie like that. This is a bittersweet ending. It is an ambiguous ending. It's an ending of what if, like, why didn't he refused to let her go? Why didn't he go with them? That's what makes this movie so memorable, and it's why we still talk about it today. Okay, the next movie on the list, Citizen Kane.
Hooray! I am speaking of Charles Foster Kane, the fighting liberal, the friend of the working man, the next governor of this state, who entered upon this campaign
With one purpose only, to point out and make public the dishonesty, the downright villainy of boss Jim W. Getty's political machine, now in complete control of the government.
Okay, so Citizen Kane came out in 1941. It was directed by Orson Welles, who also starred in it. It only won one Oscar, which is mind-boggling. That was for Best Original Screenplay, which is apropos since Mank is now on Netflix. It made $1 million at the time, which translates to $11 million today. And it is, of course, #1 on the AFI list of top 100 movies.
Shows that I'll be elected.
Obviously, Citizen Kane is a movie that we're hearing a lot about. I wouldn't be surprised if you ended up watching this video because you were curious about Citizen Kane. You're curious about what all the fuss was about. You have either seen Mank or seen the trailer for Mank or heard people talking about Mank, saw that it was on a lot of people's top 10 lists for 2020 or best movie of 2020. And so you're like, I need to know more about Citizen Kane. Obviously, it is, often considered on many of the different lists the greatest movie of all time. It's the top of the AFI list. And if you aren't familiar with the full history of cinema and you are only used to today's masterpieces, you may look at a movie like Citizen Kane and just be like, what's all the fuss? And while I believe that it still holds up, it's a movie that is still compelling and interesting with great performances and great cinematography, that you watch it today, you could be a 15-year-old kid watching it and you're still going to get something out of it. But I understand you look back at a movie like this and it's not the same as watching a modern movie. And so it may seem dated, it may seem out of touch. But one of the important things when you're judging these classic movies is what came before it. What were movies like in 1941 when Citizen Kane came out? And that's when you compare it with the other movies of that time, especially the movies that won Academy Awards instead of Citizen Kane, you are like, oh, they're way ahead of these other movies. And what Orson Welles was doing with the camera and with storytelling was really ushering in the modern movie era, and the modern art of cinema really was advanced because of Citizen Kane. From the beautiful cinematography, the use of these wide lenses that kept this very wide depth of field, to the different narrative perspectives, and then just the story and grounding it in this mystery that kind of leads you into this story, and maybe anticlimactic when you find out, or it's just, again, another great ending of ambiguity. So Citizen Kane is considered the greatest movie of all time for good reason, and if you haven't seen it, you definitely should. Next movie on the list, Singin' in the Rain.
I'm singing in the rain, just singing in the rain. What a glorious feeling, I'm happy again. I'm laughing at clouds so dark up above. The sun's in my heart and I'm ready for love.
Singing in the Rain came out in 1952. It was directed by Gene Kelly and Stanley Donen. It won 0 Academy Awards and only had 2 nominations. It made $7.2 million at the time, which translates to $108 million today. And it is number 5 on the AFI list of best movies of all time. The first thing I think about when I think about Singing in the Rain is just pure joy. It is so much fun. The music is so great. The dancing, the performances, they make you happy. They bring a tear to your eye because of the pure joy. And because of that, I think it's very hard to not call Singing in the Rain the greatest musical of all time. It is just an amazing achievement, and unbelievable to me that not only was it barely nominated for any Academy Awards, it wasn't even considered the best musical of that year. Really stunning. When you watch it and you see that, well, yes, it did have these amazing musical numbers and great performances, but there's also an experimental nature to this movie and I'm not an expert in classic Hollywood musicals. There's probably a lot of the big ones that I haven't watched, but I was really struck the first time and every time I watch it with some of those almost psychedelic moments that this movie has, and it probably was just ahead of its time and too experimental to land in 1952. And so, yeah, I guess it's just one of those movies we don't really fully appreciate it until much later. Next up on the list is Sunset Boulevard.
What are you doing?
I'm packing.
You're leaving me.
Yes, I am, Norma.
No, you're not. Max! Max!
Thanks for letting me wear the handsome wardrobe. And thanks for the use of all the trinkets. The rest of the jewelry's in the top drawer.
It's yours, Joe. I gave it to you.
And I take it in a second.
Sunset Boulevard came out in 1950. It was directed by Billy Wilder. It did win 3 Academy Awards, but they were all minor categories. It didn't win any of the big awards. It made $5 million, which translates to $39.6 million in today's dollars. And it is ranked number 16 on AFI's list of top 100 movies.
You don't care, do you? But hundreds of thousands of people will care.
Oh, wake up, Norma. You'd be killing yourself to an empty house. The audience left 20 years ago. Now face it.
That's a lie! They still want me.
No, they don't.
So this is a movie also widely considered one of the great classics of Hollywood cinema. And to me, what I think is most striking about it is just how weird it is. It's a weird movie, especially a movie from the 1940s, to have such a offbeat tone. Just the lead character is a little creepy, a little weird. It's tragicomic, the way she is holding on to her past. If you haven't seen it, it is basically a story of an over-the-hill actor who is, has seen her better days and is on the downside of her career, but she is still holding on to the glamour and the glitz of her former lifestyle and of being a star. And she misses being a star. It's a very Hollywood story. And if you know anything about Hollywood, is they love movies about Hollywood. And this is one of the classic movies about Hollywood. But it is weird, and she is very unsettling. And I think that you can really trace the lineage of modern filmmakers, like, for instance, David Lynch, to Sunset Boulevard, where you're taking the audience in an unexpected, weird direction, with a character that, while we can identify with her emotionally, it's also got some weird, strange notes. So I think that this movie takes us towards a strain of cinema that is more experimental and more offbeat, maybe even avant-garde, and but this was a movie within the studio system about, Hollywood studios and Hollywood movies. And it's also within the genre of a film noir. It's really playing upon the tropes of the film noir. And so it's really a transformation of what people were probably most familiar with in the movies at that time, and giving something very unique. And so it's a no-brainer that it would be one of the classics of cinema. And finally, the last movie on my list is The Wizard of Oz.
To Oz?
To Oz!
We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. We hear he is a whiz of a whiz, if ever a whiz there was. If ever a whiz there was, the Wizard of Oz is one because of the wonderful things he does. We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz, of course, came out in 1939. It was directed by Victor Fleming. A little tidbit about that: Victor Fleming actually left production midway through to go finish directing Gone with the Wind, which was having a troubled production, and came out in the same year. So that's a pretty amazing year for Victor Fleming. It won 2 Oscars for song and score, no surprise there. And it made $29.7 million at the box office, which translates to a whopping $525 million in today's dollars. And finally, it is ranked number 10 on the AFI list, which is obviously way too low.
Oh, dear. I keep forgetting I'm not in Kansas.
So obviously, I don't need to introduce The Wizard of Oz to you. I would be very surprised if all of you have not seen it multiple times. It's just an embedded part of our childhood. It's so central to our culture without being central. It's just something that is almost a rite of passage. And it's a movie that's going to live on for as long as we're watching movies. And I certainly hope that it never gets remade, that we are never seeing a modern version of The Wizard of Oz. And I'm sure all of you agree with me that you can't top, and there's no reason to try to top, a movie that is this perfect. To the point where you might have been surprised when I mentioned it. It is so a part of movie culture and so a part of childhood that you may overlook it when you're thinking of the classics of cinema. This is, to me, one of the paragons of Hollywood cinema, and it does everything that a great movie should. It takes you to a place that no other medium can. It is creating a fantasy world, and it's doing it through picture and sound and music, and it's just the best. I love it. You love it. We all love it. Thank God for The Wizard of Oz. So that's it for my list of the top 5 classics of American cinema. And I hope that if you haven't seen these movies, I hope you go watch them as soon as possible. And let me know what you thought of my list. And I'll be mentioning a few of my honorable mentions in the comments. And you guys, I'm sure, will let me know what I should have put in there. But I really think it's hard to argue with these 5 movies. So anyway, thanks for watching. And if you liked it, go ahead and hit subscribe. And hopefully I'll see you next time.